Welcome to the US Daily Brief channel. The conditions of the war between Russia and Ukraine continue to get tougher day by day. The voters in Russia do not stand still. Russian activists set fire to the town hall in the Chelyabinsk region with Molotov cocktails. Late at night, two people came to the town hall of the city of Baikal of the Chelyabinsk region. The activists, who broke the first floor glass of the building and entered, threw two Molotov cocktails into the building and left the scene. The fire that broke out in the municipality building was extinguished by fire brigade after long efforts. After the fire, Baikal Mayor Andrei Zarachintsev stated that Russian law enforcement is looking for the arsonists and municipality administration will work as usual. The Russian reaction to the mobilization announced by Putin to send Russian citizens to the war resulted in a series of actions. Mass protests, especially in the big cities of Russia, often result in arson. As a sign of the protest, Russian activists set fire to military branches and mobilization registration offices across the country. Protesters against mobilization set fire to military registration offices in the Far East and Transbaikalia. Also in St. Petersburg and Orenburg region, attacks on military registration offices occurred by unidentified persons. Last week, activists threw Molotov cocktails at a recruitment office in Novosibirsk. Last night in Cagliari, the entrance to the town hall was set on fire. The doors of the porch of the building and the roof burned down. Local law enforcement officials admitted that Molotov cocktails were thrown at the doors of the city hall. The fire was extinguished in a short time with the efforts of the Russian fire brigades. The Russian police launched an investigation into the incident and 3 people were detained in a short time. Collective actions continue in regions where ethnic minority population is dense against Vladimir Putin's partial mobilization plan. Analysts say the protests could undermine the Kremlin's legitimacy among these groups and likely give the Russian unmotivated soldiers in its war against Ukraine. In Russia's Dagestan region, close to the Georgian border, protesters managed to block traffic. More than 7,000 kilometers away in the region of Buryatia, just north of the border with Mongolia, a group called Free Buryatia Foundation has been set up to help. The Arctic region of Yakutia in northeastern Siberia also faced fierce resistance to Putin's plans to send 300,000 more troops to Ukraine. Gathering in the regional capital, Yakutia, demonstrators performed traditional dances and said no to war and no to genocide, they chanted. Concerns are growing that Moscow is disproportionately targeting ethnic minorities and people in Russia's poorest areas to send more troops to Ukraine. There is nothing partial about the mobilization in Buryatia. All our men are being drafted. Alexandra Garmazapova, head of the Free Buryatia Foundation, said in a statement. Buryatia is one of the poorest regions in Russia. In Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, Moscow first recruited members of the Tatar minority. Russian journalist and activist Osman Pashayev stated that 80% of the mobilization calls in Crimea were given to the Crimean Tatars. It's clear that ethnic minorities in the poorest areas are paying a disproportionate price. And that's what has been happening in the war in Ukraine in general, not just mobilization efforts, said Jeff Hahn, a Russian military affairs expert and advisor to the New Lines Institute. Moscow does not publish full data on its losses at the front. However, even with the incomplete official information, regions with the largest ethnic minorities such as Buryatia or the Tuva region seems to lose far more men by their total population than the core regions of Russia. Socioeconomic factors partly explain this inequality. In these regions, the relatively attractive pay offered by the Russian military is often the only way out of poverty, said Karashchenko, a political scientist at Nazarbayev University in Astana, Kazakhstan. Being poor, these minorities often have no choice but to perform military services for the Russians, albeit compulsory because they cannot pay the necessary bribes to avoid conscription. In major urban centers such as Moscow and St. Petersburg, conscripts may bribe or use their connections to leave the country by claiming to be students, Shen continued. In addition to these factors, there is a political motivation to target ethnic minorities. in Putin's eyes, is all about keeping his regime alive, says Adrian Floria, senior lecturer in Central and Eastern European Studies at the University of Glasgow. The Kremlin relies on the notion that minorities are much less likely to stage large-scale demonstrations than people in major urban centers. Putin is also in solidarity with the rulers he appoints in these regions to enforce the order of mobilization and extinguish any protest movements that arise. Another factor is that politicians in Moscow care little about the fate of these ethnic minorities thousands of kilometers away. Therefore, Moscow is making Russian imperialism felt to the fullest by putting pressure on the remote areas of the country. From an economic point of view, a significant portion of the working-age population will remain indefinitely inactive as long as they fight, which will inflict further economic damage on the Russia's poorest areas anyways, Flora said. By following this strategy, the Kremlin undermines its own legitimacy among groups that perceive it to be treated unfairly. As these events continued within Russia as a sign that Russia was losing control of the territories it claimed to have annexed, the Russian government, at the request of the governor appointed by Moscow, agreed to evacuate the inhabitants of Kherson. People from the Kherson region in the southern Ukraine are expected to start arriving in Russia after a Kremlin official said residents should leave for their own safety. Following this decision, Moscow announced that it would assist the public in the evacuation of Kherson. Our government has decided to organize assistance for the departure of residents of the Kherson region, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Murat Kuznolom said in a statement. The Russian appointed governor of the Kherson region in southern Ukraine had previously told residents to take their children and flee after he said he had retaken 5 settlements in Kyiv's southern district. Earlier, Vladimir Saldo had publicly sought Moscow's help in relocating civilians to safer areas. Cities in the Kherson region are exposed to missile attacks every day, Saldo said. Therefore, the Kherson administration decided to offer families living in Kherson the option to travel to other parts of the Russian Federation so that they can rest and their children can go to school. Saldo added that going forward is the priority for residents on the west bank of the Dnieper River. Russian media reported that the first group of civilians fleeing from Kherson is expected to reach Russia's Rostov region as soon as possible. Others are expected to go to Crimea, which Moscow annexed in 2014. In less than a week, the Ukrainian military said it had recaptured more than 400 square kilometers of territory in the Kherson region, and that its forces were advancing towards the 3 kilometers long Novokakhovka Dam. Local officials stressed that Mykolaiv, Ukraine's largest city closest to Kherson, suffered intense Russian bombardment on Thursday and civilian facilities were destroyed. The district governor Vitaly Kim said the top 2 floors of the 5-story residential building had been destroyed and the rest was under rubble. Video footage provided by state emergency services showed recruiters removing an 11-year-old boy who Kim said was trapped under the collapsed building for 6 hours. We will see together what kind of surprises awaits us in the following processes. Stay tuned until the next video. To be notified of the new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications. Thank you for watching.